Hey everyone, it's Darren. Today we're going to take on one of the most feared functions in statistics and in any kind of data analysis, and that's the standard deviation function. As soon as you mention standard deviation, people just have no clue what it is or why you care about it, and in my experience, it's the most feared function there is, and it's kind of weird. It's a really simple function, and it's a really useful function. On this channel, I'm going to be talking about it a lot. So the first thing I want to do is just show you what it actually is. And all standard deviation is it's how far you are away from the average. And I'm just going to do a really simple example here to show you that. So here we have a list of numbers from 50 to 150. And if you look at this, you can probably tell the average just by looking. But if we do the formula for that, average A50, A5 to A15, average is 100. Okay, that's pretty simple, right? Now, there's several steps to get the standard deviation. There are a number of functions. There's 5 functions that Excel has that will do this for you, and we'll cover those in a second. But I want to show you how it actually works first, and then we'll go actually look at the functions themselves. So you start with the average, and then you look at the difference for each item from that average. So this is going to be equals A5 minus um, $2, which is minus 50. And of course, we did the dollar, so it stays 2 when I copy this down. Okay, so no real surprise there, right? Okay, now here's the thing. If we take the average of this, of B5 to B15, that gives us 0. And that's a kind of a useless number here. So what you wind up doing is you actually square the differences. And that the main reason for doing that is it turns it into a positive number. It guarantees a positive number. So don't worry about why are you squaring it. We're going to take the square root later, which undoes it. So this is just going to be B5 times B5. And I'll copy that down. And now you see we went from having some positive numbers, some negative numbers. Now everything's a positive number. It's guaranteed positive. Okay, so now we're going to take the average of that, which is average of C5, C15, and that gives us an average of 1,000. And now we do the square root of this. Square root of C2. So we know the standard deviation is 31.6227766, and probably some more stuff out beyond that we don't care about. So what this tells you, what this number means, is that your average item is about 31 away from the average. Uh, what does that tell you? Absolutely nothing. 31 means nothing at all. But where you start to get use for it, though, is now you come down here and you actually start dividing this out, and you do. So now we're going to use the difference divided by this square root number. So not the square, but the actual difference. So this is going to be equals B5 divided by $2. And this tells us that we are 1.58, 1.6 standard deviations away from the average. If we copy this down, you see you have these numbers here, which are, this one is exactly the average. Yes, that was planned that way. And then you get a little further away and further away. Um, the more standard deviations away you are, the more significant it is. And that's the whole objective of standard deviations, is it gives you an objective method of telling, this objectively is further away from the mean. This objectively is a place I might want to start looking for a potential problem. This objectively is a place I might want to start looking for an opportunity. because it's not always obvious from the numbers. And these numbers are really well behaved. What if this one was, say, 500? Okay, that brings our standard deviation up to 119. And if you look down here, though, all these standard deviations are pretty good shape until you get down to this one right here. And this one's three standard deviations away, and everyone else is, very little away from there. The biggest one is zero point 0.6 away. But we'll cover in a future video exactly, the standards for it. There's a theoretical standard. If you're more than two standard deviations away, you should look at it. That really depends on your data and how well behaved your data is. It assumes a very large data set, which obviously we don't always have a very large data set. Uh, but but this is the basics of standard deviation, and that's all it is you take your data, you figure out how far away from the average it is normal, and then just look at this number. So these are the numbers that you care about. The standard deviation number itself means nothing, except you use that to divide the difference here in this column. So we have five functions that Excel provides that give us standard deviation. There's the one that most people are using, which is STDEV. That's the original one. It's been around since the first version of Excel. It's supported everywhere, and that one is deprecated. And deprecated means it's still around, it still works just like it's always worked, but no one really recommends using it anymore. Uh, it works on a sample of data and it ignores text. The second function that we have, and this is the one that you will probably want to mostly use now, is STDEVP. Um, these last four are all current. STDEVP works on the entire population, so it's all of your data, and it also ignores text. Then if you have a really big sample size, if you have, you know, tens of thousands of pieces of data and they're changing a lot, so you're having to recalculate this a lot, then you might want to use STDEVS. That's also current, but it only works on a sample of your data instead of having to calculate all of it. Because when we were over here on the calculation, you can see how much calculation there is. When you run that standard deviation function, Excel is actually doing all this calculation. So if you have a ton of data and you're calculating it over and over, you might want to consider the S version of the function. And then there's a STDEVSA and an STDEVPA. Now I'm going to have those two backwards. So that one's really for the whole population is the PA, and that one's really the SA there. So these two are just like the two above them, except it counts text as a zero. And the reason why to count text as a zero, yeah, in some cases, not very many cases, but there are some cases where as you're going through your data, you might have, student records, but you have a withdraw. And you want to count that as it says withdraw. And maybe you want to count that as a zero for purposes of standard deviation. Uh, there's some reasons you want to use it. Generally, though, the big one you're going to use is this one, the standard deviation for the whole population. Occasionally, you might use this one if you have a ton of data, and very, very rarely you'll have a reason why you want to use one of these ones down here with the text. Okay, so let's look at how these functions actually work here. So we have the standard deviation here is, let's look at the data source here. So we do STDEVP A3 to A12. And that comes out a little bit, just under 40, just under 41 there. Now, if we included all the text down here, I've added some text to the bottom. So if we go down to 22, it still comes out the same because it ignores text fields. Now, if we did, on the other hand, standard deviation for PA, for population and text, of A3 to A22. That one comes out considerably more because you have all of these, but then these ones down at the bottom all count as zeros. So if you have text, make sure you know which one you're using. If you don't have text, they're actually exactly the same number. I can show you here if we did standard deviation PA there, and then we do A3 to A12, we still get the same just under 41 that we had here. So that's those are the functions. The other functions that I mentioned here, the stdev, and really all of these, the parameters are all exactly the same. What you would use these for, if we calculate an average here real quick, A3 to A12, and then we calculate how many standard deviations away it is. Remember, that's what you're looking at for. Standard deviation number by itself, that 40.59, that number is completely useless by itself. It means absolutely nothing. All you care about is how many standard deviations away from the average you are. So here, the average here is going to be A3 minus B$2. So that's how far away it is. And then we divide this by that standard deviation number up there, which is B$1. So we're really, really close there. And again, we can just copy this right down here. And we see, if you look at these, you see 200. Wow, that's really big. And that's a place you might want to look for a problem or an opportunity. Is a high number good or bad here? If these are numbers for sales for your 10 different salespeople, for example, this person that sold 200 when the average was 100, that person's doing pretty well. Whereas this person here that's negative 1.8 standard deviations, uh, only sold 24, that person might have some problems. So that's all there is to standard deviation, really. The functions are pretty simple. It's pretty simple to understand. If you got a little bit lost, now that you've seen a couple more examples, you might want to go back and look at the way it was calculated, if that helps. But you just have these five functions. Like I said, this top one is deprecated. You might still see it in old spreadsheets, and if you're just typing standard deviation, unfortunately, it's the first one that comes up. So a lot of people still use it. It's not really inaccurate, but these others are all more accurate. So that's why you'd use them. So hope you learned something from this video. I hope standard deviation isn't quite so scary anymore. I have a lot of stuff coming up on standard deviation, and really the whole channel is gonna have it here and there throughout, just because it's such an incredibly useful function. So if you learned anything from the video, please hit like, and also be sure to subscribe and click notify so you can see future videos that come out. And if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. And thanks for stopping by.